So the idea of today's presentation is to make a comparison of system dynamics, but since you have been learning a lot about discrete event simulation, what I'm going to explain more about what is system dynamics, and then to finish with what is the differences and similarities between discrete event simulation and system dynamics. So if we want to analyze or categorize the different simulations tools, we can use different dimensions. In this graph, what we have is that you can categorize in terms of the level that you have this analysis. So you can have some analysis at the level of operations, at the level of micro behavior and full details of a system, or you can have, as you move along, perhaps in the organization or in different areas, a more strategic level or macro perspective, where what you try to see is you don't pay attention too much to the details, you are less focused on the detail, and you try to abstract from what is the basic detail of the operations of a system. So you can be dealing at the level of aggregate global causal dependencies and feedback dynamics when you are at this top level of abstraction, compared with traditional discrete simulation that usually focus on individual objects. You always try to represent how the customers behave across the different stages of a process. You have an exact size, you have similar distances, and you have more or less similar behavior. So in discrete event simulation, the entities or the objects are passive objects, right? They follow the behavior that you say will follow in your model. You tend to use flowcharts and or transportation networks, so you have the different set of queues in the system as the different resources to serve those entities, and you obtain some result. So the system will be in some way stochastically determined by the behavior of the different components in terms of queues and resources. On the other hand, when you are looking at system dynamics, what you try to look is at aggregate level. You try to understand what's happened at the global level rather than specifically on each individual. One of the main concepts of system dynamics are feedbacks. So they are process of action and reaction between the different entities in the system. So you stop of the entities as being passive objects, and there are some always active behavior in the system determined by how they interact over time and what are their different decision rules. So one is, and one of the main components is feedback loops or feedback concepts. The other important component, and in this case is quite similar to the discrete event simulation, the concept but not the idea, is that you have stocks and flows. By stocks and flows, those are buffers that you have in the system or accumulations of different entities, of different actors, of different concepts that then tend to change over time depending on the flows that you have in the system. So we can categorize system dynamics initially at that point where what we deal are with abstractions, not very much focused on the operation of one resource or the behavior of one customer, but you try to see in a more broader perspective. You look at the behavior over time, especially in terms of feedback processes. Right? So that's the two main characteristics. So you may say, okay, where does system dynamics come from? Well, system dynamics is a methodology created at the end of the 1950s and the beginning of the 1960s by a professor called J. Forrester at MIT. Professor Forrester was an engineer. One of the main ideas, or as an engineer, one of the main theories that he used was control theory. So he applied control theory to, in his times when he was working for for the US Army during the Second World War to help target, to help manage weapon system in order to target different objects. Those ideas, then when he finished his work there, he joined MIT in the management school of MIT. He tried to put those ideas to understand what's happening in social systems. So his main, or his initial application of that was in understanding the dynamics of supply chain. And one of the important aspects of the supply chain is that if you look across the whole supply chain, there's an amplification from the consumer decision or the consumer demand until what is finally received in the factory that create oscillations over time in the supply chain. And those oscillations are caused by behaviors of the different actors as well as the existence of the stocks and flow. So he understood that problem, and he defined in his book called Industrial Dynamics, here is a copy of the book, he defined what will be the field of system dynamics. What are the main components of system dynamics? What are the main areas of interest of system dynamics? And by areas of interest of system dynamics, he suggested that system dynamics can contribute the field of management and management science by understanding the dynamics of social organizations. And by social organization, you can put into that area from a company to a national economy. So as you can see, always the focus was the social aspects, the behavior aspects of the organization, not the optimization aspect, not much the operational aspect, but understanding how bounded rational decision makers can, by doing well what they understand in terms of their area of responsibility, can generate very counterintuitive behaviors in terms of the global performance of the system. So after this book, Jay Forrester had quite a number of PhD students. I had quite a number of projects, and I think the most iconic project that is still quite controversial, but nevertheless is robust in terms of the system, is that in 1971 he developed a model of the world. It was called World Dynamics, and that book, right, was very badly received. But at that time, most than 40 years ago, he showed that pollution was one of the key problems that humanity will face, and it will face within the next 100 years. So it wasn't non-renewables as one of the points, but it was mostly pollution generated by exponential growth of the population over time. That book then gave rise to additional books, and some of them were published every 10 years, calibrating similar model and showing if those initial behaviors were reproduced as time passed. So, and those books are called Limits to Growth. So if you want to read some of those books, that's an interesting insight on the dynamics of the world and how the different aspects of the global dynamics can affect our life over time. Other areas, as I mentioned, right, with world dynamics, environmental modeling. So many people use the models to understand what happened with water scarcity, what happened with sustainability of forests, what happened with different systems related usually to biological systems. Another important contribution was in the area of fisheries management. So with system dynamics, there are some researchers that try to explain how the impact of different policies and behaviors of fishermen can deplete whole type of fish, right, in different areas. Another important contribution was the simulation of urban dynamics, so how cities develop over time, how cities grow and contract, how certain parts of the cities decay and become abandoned. And based on that insight, then there's quite a number of consulting firms that they use this model to do transportation planning. So that in order to understand what is the requirement for highways, what are the requirements for roads, and in that way they support governments developing policies and developing roads to alleviate congestion and other problems in transportation. There are some colleagues that they are as well looking into the area of healthcare. I will show you in a moment, because one of the applications that I'm going to show this afternoon is an application on healthcare that I did with a colleague. So there's important contribution in that area, understanding the spread of diseases, understanding how chronic diseases are developed, understanding the impact of diabetes, the impact of obesity. So they are quite very interesting work in that area, helping hospital to optimize the patient flow. So they are quite important contributions, and many times with institutions like the CDC, the Control Disease Center in the USA, or the NHS here in the UK. Another important area that system dynamics has been applied is project management. So how projects can be out of scope and be over budget when there are different tasks that are not performed over time, and there are delays in the system. And the final area where most of my research is concentrated is in strategic management. So how companies can survive in the markets, how companies can grow over time or can collapse as they make different investment decisions. What will happen with the competitive dynamics in markets? That was that was the topic of my PhD, precisely the dynamics of competitive industries using system dynamics and understanding what can be the winners and the losers depending on certain strategies that they follow in the market. In my case, I applied this to a fast-moving consumer goods company, and I'm trying to understand how the behavior of, for example, Procter & Gamble managed to compete with other company at the same time. They compete as well with the Sainsbury and the Tesco's which are the supermarkets, which are very strong competitors, especially in fast-moving consumer goods. So this gives you a broader sense of how or what can you do with system dynamics, and if you want to know more about them or more references, feel free to contact me after the lecture. At this point, do you have any questions, any observations that you have? No? So let me give you a background or trying to explain to you what is system dynamics, or what I am talking about in terms of system dynamics. So system dynamics is basically composed by two core concepts. One, as I mentioned before, the feedback processes that are generated by operating functions, operating linkages, so how things connect in a business, information channels, so how the information channels through the organization and reach the decision makers, and decision function, how people make decisions. That's part of the feedback processes that you capture in a system dynamics model. The other part is the accumulation processes, or stocks and flows. So how these decisions tend to generate some behaviors that then tend to accumulate in terms of stocks, and those accumulation processes are driven by the feedback processes and the flows. So let's see in more detail one of the main tools that help you to represent causal feedback loops. That is, this tool is called causal loop diagrams. what we say is that causal loop diagrams are mainly focused on representing the feedback structure of the system. So here you are only looking at the feedback processes without focusing on the accumulation processes. So you are specifically focusing on that aspect. And why is that? Is because many times people don't make sense of the whole system. They have a bounded perception of what is the components of the system. They only understand parts of the system. They have a partial view. It's part of this behavioral perspective of we humans are bounded rational. We are not perfect rational like the economic theory try to imply. So having this bounded rationality implies that we cannot see the whole system and we cannot see the feedback processes that exist in the system. So therefore, one of the main contributions of this type of tool is to communicate those feedback processes with the perspective of trying to simulate that conceptually, trying to understand what will happen if something of the structure of the system changes. So what are the components? And one of the important aspects of causal loop diagrams is that they are hypotheses. Until you simulate a causal loop diagram, you simulate by developing the full model, right? Now including stocks and flow. There are just simply hypotheses about the structure determine the performance of the system over time. So you need then to do some simulation, but nevertheless can give you an important insight. So one of the first things that you usually pay attention when you are doing system dynamics is first you look into the behavior over time. So you try to understand what are the variables' performance, what are the performance of the variables over time. So if we see here a performance over time of any social network, any Facebook, any Twitter, any of these websites that are based on social networks, they follow similar performance, which is the number of clients, of the number of people subscribed to the website depends on the word of mouth that exists in the website, and that growth tends to be exponential. The more the clients talk about the product, the more people join the product, and the more people join the product, the more the clients, the more word of mouth is generated. So how do we represent that? Basically in this form. What we say here is that the clients affect the word of mouth. And that's the link that we are represented. Clients generate words of mouth. Word of mouth, after it's generated, generates more clients. So these are the causality that we are representing. Then we have another aspect of that causality, which is what type of relationships are established between these two variables. So the sign positive implies that there is a positive relationship between these two variables. So if we think in terms of a regression analysis, you will see that the linkage between these two variables, when you have a positive relationship, we have here clients and we have here words of mouth. So if we do a scatter plot of different points, we will have that the regression and line will have a positive slope. So when we say that one variable is affected the other variable in a positive way, what we have is a positive slope in a linear regression. So the more clients I have, the more word of mouth I'm going to have. So that's the basic implication of that relationship. However, we are thinking about here causality and not correlation. We are not saying that you will extract most of this relationship from correlation analysis, from regression analysis, but you are going to, through some process, you will assume that that will be the cause effects that you are observing between these two variables. So causal loop diagrams consist basically variables, the variables that you are trying to connect, how they are connected, which variable is influencing the other variable, in which way they are influencing, if it's causal link polarity, it's positive or negative, and the type of loop identifier. If the loop is reinforcing, means that a small change in the system leads to larger change. So it's an amplification in the behavior of the system. So that's an aspect of reinforcing feedback process. Balancing feedback process is the situation when the system tends to be stable as once a change in the system occurs. So, as I mentioned before, the positive relationship, if you want to translate into more specific mathematical notation, we are assuming that the relationship between these two variables, the first derivative is a positive derivative. So what we are suggesting here is that if everything is equal, an increase in one variable will lead to an increase in the other variable. A change in the same direction of one variable will lead to a change in the same direction of the other variable. For example, an increase in product quality will lead to an increase in sales. You will end up selling more products. A higher effort that you put in your course, you attend the classes, you do the best that you can with the course, during the course, for sure you will achieve better results. Right? That's a lot of experience. We can see it there. Or if we look into social systems, the number of births increases population, and there are more people, as there are more population, will lead to more births. So that's a positive relationship. A negative relationship, what's happened is that a change in a variable, if x increases, then the following variable, y, will change in the opposite direction. So y will decrease. If x decreases, y will increase. So in terms of derivative, the first derivative of y with respect to x will be negative. Price, an increase in price will lead to lower units, right? If we have, if the elasticity between these two products if the product is elastic. So in this case, if we change this graph, we have here price, right, and here is sales. We will have a line like this. So at the very high price, we will have very low sales. At the low price, we will have higher sales. So a negative relationship implies that relationship between two variables. So you say pair of variables is simple to understand, but when you have a full system composed of many variables and many relationships, that's when managing or understanding the behavior of the system becomes very complex. And I'm going to show you in a moment one example. So once we have that causal explanation between the relationship of two variables, what we create are the reinforcing feedback process, right? The different feedback loops that you have in the system. Because what we suggest is that the feedback structure of the system is what generates the behavior or the dynamics. Because word of mouth generates more clients and more clients generate more word of mouth, you will expect to see a behavior over time of clients following an exponential path. On the other hand, if we have a lot of clients, we will have a lot of client losses if we are not giving a good service. As we lose those clients, we will have less clients over time. So in this case, as the clients decline, the client losses decline as well until they reach an equilibrium where in this case there's no more clients. The goal in this case is implicit. There's no more clients to lose, and that's when the system reaches an equilibrium. You say, okay, that's a concept of the balancing feedback process. So you say, okay, this is very simple. I can understand that. But let's do the following. Let's do a conceptual simulation of that system. And let's go back to these two feedback processes. And here I have a challenge for you. So we say clients. Clients is our variable. Here we have word of mouth. Word of mouth increases clients. Clients increases word of mouth. We say this is a reinforcing feedback process, that we read it in this way. Clients, more client losses. And more client losses reduces the number of clients, and that is a balancing feedback process. So we have a very simple representation of what can be a business. On this side, we have how many clients can we be attracting from the marketing side. Yes, this may be the area of the marketing managers, but here, this is the area of the operation manager. Is how good the manager is performing or is providing these services. So if we have these two feedback processes affecting the system, the business over time, and you want to simulate conceptually what will happen with this business over time, can you tell me, take 5 minutes and try to simulate what will be the behavior over time of the clients, okay? Yes, that's clear? That's the challenge for you. So this is the system that we are representing. Here we have clients, and we have one reinforcing feedback process through word of mouth, and we have a balancing feedback process determined from the client losses. So take a few minutes, think what will be the behavior of clients over time of this business if you have to simulate conceptually. And you want to give a sort of advice to these managers, what will happen with their business. Any suggestions? Any wild guesses? Or not wild guesses, but you may be more students, so you can do this. What will be the performance of clients over time? Come on, guess. You draw something. Tell me what should I draw here? With your hand, if you want. Come on, don't. Any guess? Okay, so we have one guess that is like that, yeah? Any other guess? Informed guess, wild guess? What will be that? Suggestion? No guessing. Tell me why you say this. What are you observing?
To start with, there won't be many clients, but as the number of clients increases, word of mouth will increase, so that will drive up the initial exponential growth.
Yes.
Then over time, as the number of clients increases, the number of clients who drop out will also start to increase, and eventually that will match the level of increase of word of mouth.
Yes, so I'm writing this, yeah, I hope so. So at this point you are suggesting that perhaps the same numbers of clients that you attract will drop. That's why you have a flat.
It will probably start dropping eventually when everyone is either a client or has been a client.
Okay. So, you may suggest that it may collapse as well, the business. Okay, so in this case it's... Yes, that's a good guess. And I translate your verbal explanation in terms of which of the feedback processes is stronger over time, right? Which is more predominant. So in this case, the reinforcing feedback process is stronger than the balancing feedback process, up to a point where the balancing feedback process start becoming not stronger, but the reinforcing feedback process is becoming less stronger than the balancing feedback process, up to a point where the reinforcing feedback process is equal to the balanced feedback process. The same number of people that we attract, we lose. And there may be a point where if you run out of clients, the balancing feedback process is the dominant feedback process, yes. And it's a combination of these two processes, because you can even say that nothing will happen if the reinforcing feedback process is equal to the balancing feedback process. So we are such a bad company that all the clients that we attract, we lose because we don't have the necessary skills, yeah, or we can be very lucky and everything grows forever. In that case, the reinforcing feedback process will be much larger than the balancing feedback process. But you can see that by plotting set of 3 variables being affected by 2 feedback loops and having between them 4 causal relationships, you can generate very interesting dynamics and very difficult sometimes to interpret those dynamics, especially for people that they don't manage these concepts. So what we try to do in system dynamics to address those problems is to use simulation, and in order to use simulation we need to add a second concept, which is the stocks and flows. So the stocks and flows are accumulations that characterize the state of the system. So at any point in time, the number of clients as an accumulation determines, right, what is happening in the system, determines what is the situation of the system. And the stocks, right, it says, are in some way the memory of the system. The value of the number of clients at this point in time depends on what happened with the flows previously, what happened with the resources, with the actions that were occurring. So in some way the stocks are the memories of the system. And the stocks create delays between, right, inflows and outflows. So they are usually, stocks contain the difference between these two rates of change over time. And the stocks, the interesting thing, and that's why system dynamics is quite a versatile tool, is that you can represent with the stock almost any system. And here I have another example for you. Let's use this. So if our body is a stock of what will you say? What will be the components of what we are accumulating as a body? What will be the main inflow to our body? Well, we can one way of measuring how is our stock in terms of body is our weight, right? Our weight is a reflection of the accumulation of calories, right? Calories intake through food. Yes, through food, that's our inflow. That's how we gain weight, through calories intake. How do we lose weight? How do we lose weight? By calories burning, right, is what we do in terms of activities. Are we very sports oriented, or are we a bit lazy? If we are a bit lazy, when the way that these two flows stop being dynamically in equilibrium is when one of the activities that drive these two stocks, or the activities that drive these two stocks, are unbalanced. You are eating too much for the number of calories that you're burning. You are not doing enough sports for the number of calories that you're burning. So you can see that the body weight in some way reflects our past behavior in terms of what we eat. But it's not immediate. If you eat a chocolate today, this doesn't mean that you automatically will gain 1 pound. But over a longer period of time, the accumulation of the different pattern of behavior will determine what is, right, our weight, and determine what is, in some way, the weight as a memory of the system, as a memory of our behaviors in terms of food. So that's why system dynamics is quite a versatile tool, because you can represent almost any system using these principles. And the stocks can be tangible, right? You can see, you can measure, you can count, right? Like for example, people, or can be intangible, right? Can be belief. You accumulate a belief, you accumulate a reputation. A brand is accumulated after many years of doing good products, after doing a lot of advertising. So you can almost associate of any system, or you can find in any system a stock. So how do we represent, or what is implied behind a stock is this idea that a stock is a shortcut for an integral equation. Behind a stock we have integral equations. So, and we represent stocks as boxes and arrows, stocks as boxes and flows as arrows that go into a stock, and outflows, arrows that go out to the stock. So as an integral, we can say that the stock at any point in time is the integral from 0 until that point in time of the difference between the inflow and the outflow, plus what was the stock at the beginning. So basically, this is what we have behind a stock. Many times, you cannot calculate, you cannot find an analytical solution of a very complex system where these inflows are affected by many feedback processes. So that's why we tend to simulate these systems. We tend to generate simulation models, because we cannot find analytical solution. We can find numerical solutions from this. So that's why we tend to simulate these models. And the main focus is usually, when we are doing this model, on representing the feedback processes and the stock. So as a way of communicating what is the dynamic complexity that is driving the different systems. Any questions? So this was a more than brief introduction to system dynamics and the main components. Now I want to show you a couple of applications of some of my work in that area, in this area. No? Okay. So let me explain you first a project that I did for a financial services company. This work was published in the System Dynamics Review. That's the main journal. So if you want to learn more in detail about what we are doing in System Dynamics, that's the main journal of the area. System Dynamics Review has been published for, I think, 30, 40 years now, or 30 years, yes, approximately, with another name at the beginning. So the title of this paper is called Achieving a Balanced Organizational Structure in Professional Services Firms, Some Lessons from the Modeling Project. It's quite interesting, this project, or was quite interesting, because it explains a lot. If many of you are going to work in a consulting firm, this sort of insights that you are going to understand here will tell you why at a certain point in time in your career in a consulting firm, you may be out of the firm naturally. So many times a career in a consulting firm is not a life career. So, but this is one of the at least one of the insights from this project. Interesting, because one of the main problems that professional services firms have is the ratio of three main type of staff that you have. One is the junior staff, the people that just start working in the firm without too much knowledge, without too much experience. Then you have mid-level staff, which is the people that have some experience, they are learning on the process, they are doing most of the jobs, but they don't have the decision-making process. They are not looking for clients. They are not in the planning projects, but they are in some way controlling some of the juniors, training some of the juniors, and helping some of the senior staff. And the senior staff has usually very focused activities which are related to either promoting those juniors on mid-level, finding new projects, or supervising very complex projects. But they are not usually doing the day-by-day job. They are on more of the sort of long-term view of the business. And this ratio is called the firm's leverage. And why this ratio is important is because if you see in terms of the cost and in terms of salaries, the highest salary is the senior staff, then you have the mid-level, which has certain salary, and the junior are usually the lowest salary. So when professional firms are trying to sell a project, they have some constraints on how much can they charge. So they cannot put for a project all senior staff because that will be too expensive. So that's why you have to leverage these three categories of staff. But there is a problem leveraging these three categories of staff. One is the short term, right? Is what the market demands and what you need as a firm to earn to be profitable. That's a static equilibrium issue, I would say. You say, I'm going to have 10 projects that require, and I have this staff with this composition. I can allocate it in this way, and that will be my profits, and that will be what's happened in terms of achieving a balance between the supply, the demand from the markets, from the projects, and what you have in terms of supplies of skills and capacity. But there are as well long-term issues, right? It's the organizational structure and the professional development. Many people, when join a consulting firm, they are attracted from the promises or the expectation of growing over time in terms of their skills and developing more challenging projects and doing more and more stuff. So these are these two trade-offs, the short-term with the long-term issues. Any questions with so far? No? So what is important for many managers is to achieve that trade-off between satisfying short-term financial performance with long-term staff development. Because if you are in a professional firm and you work a lot, but you don't see that progression being fulfilled, then naturally you start becoming demotivated and you try to leave the firm because you will earn more somewhere and you will work less time. So that's a natural factor that occurs. How many of you have been already working in some consulting firm, even as intern in a summer project? Any? No, none of you. Okay, so that will be a good eye-opener for you. So if we want to make that as a representation, what you have is that the gray triangle is what is required in terms of organizational structure based on the demand that you have. And the transparent triangle is what is the current organizational structure. So what many times happens is that what is demanded from the market cannot satisfy what you have in terms of resources, in terms of staff that you have in the business. So that creates an unbalanced organizational structure where you have certain demand for a certain type of skills, but your shape, your organization is designed or is in a different state. So moving from one side to the other in order to match these two aspects create a lot of tension because you cannot go and find new people in the market immediately. There's a long-term process, and many times this long-term process is not aligned with what is the demands from the market. So you may hire people, and the people and the junior staff need to be trained, and they may take too much time when they are ready for satisfying the market demand. So then you have a problem in your size of your organization. So what did I do? Basic on this idea, I worked for a financial professional service firm where I had the opportunity to look at 4 different services. And I called because I cannot disclose the identity of this firm, but they have these 4 different rating services. And you can see what is the performance of these services over time. So you can see that service A was quite laggard. It was quite slow in terms of growing the service. Service B is a very fast grower. So in 3 years moved from 120 projects to 720 projects. So imagine that tension in terms of market demand to the resources that you have in the business. Service C is very similar to service A, is quite flat. The demand there's not much movement in that service. And service D went through a process of a strong growth and then is stopped in some way. So it's flat, the growth for this process. So I have the same model that I can apply and explain for 4 different cases. And this is usually one of the interesting things that you have when you are doing this type of projects in a company where, and they have similar structure applied to different areas. So you can see what's happening in a business, in the same business, divided in four divisions. So if you have this situation, so what sort of model do you conceptualize? Well, you try to conceptualize the model from the perspective of the feedback processes, and you think how dynamically this company will adapt to those demands. So we have on one hand, on the right-hand side, we have the time demand. So I translated all the project's demand in terms of time. So for doing a project, how many hours do you need? for supervising a junior staff, how many hours do you need? To coordinate a project, how many hours do you need? To hire new staff, how many hours do you need? To train staff, how many hours do you need? These are basic processes, and they are embedded in any company, and for me, for these projects, were exogenous variables. I assume that those values are given. And the other values that are given are the market demands. How many projects do you expect to satisfy in the next 2 years, 3 years? And I split the projects in terms of simple projects and complex projects. So you can see that there are some projects that require more time than other projects. That's the time demand. So what is the time supply? The time supply is determined by the number of staff that you have, right? Like say a staff, and that staff provides certain number of hours. Based on what? Based on a certain proportion of their time employed to do those processes, those tasks. So number of staff with a certain times give you a time supply. When you match the time demand in terms of processes and projects with the time supply, that generates a certain performance. That performance implies that you can satisfy some clients or you cannot satisfy some clients. You are delayed with your projects, or you have to work more hours for your projects. You do training, or you can do training because you have to fulfill that demand. So that imbalances are reflected through the short-term adjustment of the time allocation. So how people start making trade-off between the different actions in order to adapt to what is necessary to satisfy the requirements from the market, from the time demand. In the medium to long term, the intervention is through the staff budgeting. How many people do I need to hire? Because that is the only way of increasing time supply. Even though you reallocate activities, there is a point where the amount of time that you have for doing activities is finite. So you cannot ask people to work 24 hours continuously. After a period of time, these people will feel very, very sick and ill because of this process. So how do you translate that structure? So at the core of the model, stocks are a reflection of the number of people that are in each stage. So you have novice staff, so this is the people that start, that are higher, so there is an inflow there that is not represented, but you hire people, that's an inflow, that people is accumulate over that, or over time, and then these people, as is being trained, move into an intermediate category, where they know about the process, but they don't have enough experience. These people can also leave, so there's another flow that I haven't represented. So people can leave the organization because they are dissatisfied, they find another job. So intermediate staff, through experience, through many projects and training, become advanced staff. Advanced staff, as they have more experience, they can tackle more complex projects, become senior staff, and after a promotion process, they become managers. So you see that there is a stock of people moving across different stages of their skills. So this set of stocks represent, in some way, the skills that are acquiring over time. How long do you think will take to go through this process, on average? 10 years, yes, to get to the managers, probably. But to get up to senior staff, 2 to 3 years, depending on how bright is a person, right? It's approximately 3 years. So imagine that now. Imagine, let's go back to the previous slide. To this slide. This company that is growing, the service B that is moving from 120 to 720, so in 3 years grows 600%. By the time that you are having all these skilled people, it may be too late, because there's no you need to expand like 6 times your capacity almost immediately. So that's one of the very big problems when you have system and you have delays in the system. So here is a more detailed, the analysis, the quantitative analysis that I did for each of these categories. So the manager is not involved at all in project completion, is 50% of their time acquiring projects, 25% of their time supervising other staff, 10% of their time hiring, 15% of their time training. So I asked them to do a timesheet of each of their activities for each category, and that was one of the results. So based on that allocation of time, in terms of percentages, multiply by what is the days available per month for each of the different staff, that gives you what is the time available per task in staff days. So that's why I call the static analysis. You have a certain number of projects to do over a month. That implies a certain number of days, a certain number of processes, and you have certain amount of staff, and immediately you can see if you can perform your task or not. That's a static analysis. That defines what you need to do and what will happen, right? So if you see for this specific product, for this specific service, the number of projects feasible per year based on 10 months, that will be 90 simple projects and 88 complex projects. And you see what are the number of expected projects over the next 3 years. So they expect to have 118 projects in both categories. So they have a shortage of staff in this company. So the question is, how do you build up the necessary amount of staff if you have all these delays and all these steps in the process? You need you cannot make a final analytical solutions to that. You need some simulation to understand that dynamics. What I also did in terms of the projects is that saying, okay, if you face this situation, how will you change your normal activities? So here is a table that reflects on the x axis is the backlog in terms of projects. What is the percentage of total completion time that you need in order to do all the projects that you have predicted? So if it is 1, you have the right amount of time for all the projects that you need to do. But if the percentage is 50% more than the time that you have available, what the staff does is start changing the activities, start reducing some of the activities. So those lines represent how the staff is going to behave if they see that they require a lot of time to do projects. So for example, the blue line shows you the project acquisition. So if they have 50% more projects than the time that they have in order to satisfy them, they will stop acquiring projects. They will say, no more projects, let's finish what we have. So they move from 1 up to 0.5. They will reduce as well training from 1 up to 50%, and they will reduce less supervising, right, from 1 up to 60%, because quality is usually an important factor of the results of any project in service firm. So you can see that there is as well embedded a behavioral and decision process in the way that we reflect these models. So this was embedded into our simulation. And then what we did is that we create an interface for the managers to try to understand what will happen with their decisions. So on the one hand, they have some forecast about the number of projects that they're going to have. That's the bottom left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you have all the dynamics that you see, and you have different buttons where you can click and you can see additional information. For example, you can go to the process time demand. You can see how many hours do you need to do certain process, and you may change that. You can go to the staff management, and you can hire people if you want. Or you can go into the time management and you say, okay, where do we allocate our time? As well, this simulator also has a traffic light system. So it's telling you how they are performing with respect to the goals. That's why you have greens and yellow traffic lights, where it tells the manager immediately, look, we are doing okay, or we are really in very bad shape. So that was the interface. So once we explain what is the dynamics of the business, through these basic causal feedback loops, I would say, we created a simulator, and then we started playing with the different ideas. One interesting thing that they realized is that, and this is part of the outcomes of the simulations, are this graph, where what you see is, in terms of months, in terms of time, what will be the allocation of time, right? The proportion of time employed in three key categories of senior staff, right? Depending on the hiring policy. When do you start hiring people? Do you start hiring people after you know that you are going to have a lot of work, or you start hiring people just before, in order to compensate those delays? So in this case, you start hiring people after you realize that you are losing people and you have more demands. And what's happened is that, yes, hiring people will solve some of the problems, but the organization goes through some oscillation process in terms of the attention that they have. So because they don't have enough staff, the red line, the number one, you see that project completion tends to increases once there's no staff. So most of the people are focused on finishing their work, and they stop bringing new projects until they reach the goal. And once they reach the goal in terms of finishing their project, they start bringing more and more projects, and then so on and so forth. So there's a cyclicality in the system. So the organization goes through very stressful periods for a number of months until they solve that period, those projects, and then they start bringing more projects. But as soon as they bring more projects, again, it goes into a stressful period. So you see that the organization goes through many stressful processes, and there is a certain danger in terms of the quality of the products, of the services provided, because the green line is the percentage of senior staff working on projects that they should not be working. So because they need to finish that work, they bring unexperienced people to try to finish that work. And that's a risk for the company, because even though people will learn and will become more productive over a period of time, the organization simultaneously is engaged into a certain potential problem, because they are not using the right staff with the right skills. So that's why we have senior staff simple projects. So there are, in the paper, there are a number of more simulations, more analysis of numerical analysis of the different processes. But just to finish this analysis, the conclusions of this evaluation was basically saying hiring and promotion proactive policy. So you hire in advance and you promote the people in advance when you expect certain type of demand, leads to an expensive organizational structure without knowing really what will happen with the growth perspective. You are making a bet that you will find that necessary demand. But if this demand is not realized, you will have over-skilled people at the very expensive salaries, so that will be a problem in the future. So you say, okay, I don't want to incur in extra cost, and I don't want to have a very expensive organizational structure, so let's wait until we know that we have demand and start hiring policy. And start hiring when we know that the demand is certain. So we are like a fireman. We start, right, rushing behind the fire when we have. But this is not better, because what's happened is until those junior recruitment start being more productive, the middle-level staff become overburdened. So when you start working in a consulting firm or a professional services firm, you will see that as you progress, you are not working less. You are working much more than you expected, much more. So you are usually overstressed. So mid-level staff is usually the staff that suffer most in terms of workload. Because yes, you cannot make miracles with the people that you hire. So that's why many people abandon consulting firms before becoming managers, before becoming partners, before becoming even with any opportunity to grow, because you are very stressed and you can get more with less work. So what's happened is that usually you have the policy that is called up or out system, where you promote people, yes, in order to cope with potential demands and in order to have the right quality, but you wait after a period of time and then you encourage these people to look for another jobs in some way, because there are no other opportunities to keep growing. That's the usual carrots that you have. You cannot keep growing, therefore look for another sort of job. So that was one of the main conclusions for this type of analysis, right, in terms of the dynamic of professional services firm. So as you can see, it's a very strategic point of view of how professional firm works. We are not looking at one project in specifically how you allocate a smaller task. We were looking at the long-term projects from a very broad overview, a strategic overview. Any questions with this application before I pass to the next one? Any reactions? No? Okay, so let's go to the next application. Well, those were the questions. The next application is in the pharmaceutical markets. This is a case study in a chronic cardiac disease market with my colleague, Ross Kazakov. And this paper was published in the Journal of the Operational Research Society. So you can see there in more detail about this paper. So as I said here, it was a modeling project, involved system dynamics in a chronic cardiac disease market in Bulgaria. Well, what we look is what's happened with a certain cardiac drug molecule in the market and how the different actions and behavior of doctors and patients can generate certain costs for the National Health Institute in Bulgaria. And what can you do in order to help to overcome healthcare costs? And this is the main topic, or the main concern nowadays for many governments as the population is becoming older. How do you cope with the healthcare cost? So the system dynamics model was generated with many stakeholders, and the information was sourced from many of them, right? The National Healthcare Fund, the Generic Pharmaceutical Association, and a market research firm that provided quite a number of the information. So why is it important to reform healthcare policies? Well, basically what we have is that the price of medicine is one of the major market attributes of the pharmaceutical products, because we as patients, we don't have enough information about drugs. We trust our doctors, but at the same time we have a restriction, which is how much can we afford for that, to pay for that drug. At the same time, the drug firms, of the pharmaceutical firms, they have an incentive to maximize their profits. They have shareholders. So there's a tension there, right, in the public good, which is trying to reduce the cost for population of being healthy, and with all the implication of, right, generating wealth out of being healthy and work, and the extraction of that, right, wealth from the pharmaceutical companies through the price of the medicines. So one of the important aspects that affect that is the timing, right, of pricing. When do you accept certain increases in price? What sort of price plans do you generate, and how much can you reimburse to the patients of the drugs that they have to pay? So this may not be applicable here in the UK, where you have a fixed price, and what you usually prescribe is the molecule name. You are not prescribed a brand name. But in many countries in the European Union, what you are prescribed is not the molecule. You are prescribed the brand name. So maybe instead of buying ibuprofen, you may be prescribed a brand of ibuprofen. And if you go and you compare in the market, there can be a difference of 10 to 1 the price. So you can, that's the difference. So that's why it's important. The timing of the pricing, the reimbursement that the government can provide to the people, and how you access markets for these generic drugs, those drugs that are not branded, but they are mainly based on molecules. And one of and this is coming from many of the recent Nobel Prizes about this issue on the markets of healthcare services. There are significant degrees of asymmetric information and agency relationships, because, as I said, you don't have enough information about the market. You have a need, when there is that situation, is that, right, you may have adverse selection, and Stiglitz is one of the main leading figures in that area. So we have that problem, and we decided to use system dynamics. And one of the reasons that we decided to use system dynamics is because we have many applications of system dynamics in healthcare. We have many models that address nowadays very popular sort of diseases like diabetics, HIV, AIDS, right? The impact of smoking on diseases. Once a person starts smoking, what are the different diseases that will happen? Not now, you will be healthy, but 20 years later, when the accumulation of many cigarettes, right, they start affecting your health. So there is long delay in healthcare. So that's why it's very important to understand the impacts now, because somebody that start behaving not in an unwealthy way as a young will see the impact 40 years later. And that's when you have, right, big problems. You have to pay for all this healthcare. So that's why it's quite important in terms of system dynamics, see the progression of cohorts of population in terms of different diseases and how can you make an impact there. Other models, they are mostly looking into now how they solve the problem of healthcare provision, patient flows, where you can track the patients through different stages of the treatment and how these stages affect the resources that you have in the system. How can you see the different performance assessment, right? How can you understand why accident and emergency become congested, and how do you tackle those sort of problems, like public health emergency? How do you plan human resources in healthcare? Nowadays, there are quite large models at national level that they are looking at that, at the workforce of the healthcare industry. How many healthcare professionals do you need if you have more people with certain diseases? That's part of the simulation here. And the final one is you using public health planning and healthcare reform. So there are quite a number of models that address those issues. So we have a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise in system dynamics in healthcare. So what we did in this case study, we first started with the causal loop diagram. Right? Instead of going specifically to the model at the first stage, we try to understand what are the broader implications of facilitating patient access and what are the different impacts of different policies. So as you can see in the causal loop diagram, we have three main reinforcing feedback processes. The first reinforcing feedback process is related to the patients that, as they are treated with expensive drugs, they become non-persistent. So those patients, they cannot afford those drugs, so they stop taking those drugs. So what's happened, and this is this part of the feedback loop, the non-persistent patients, they become worse in their health. So at the end, they increase hospital costs because they become chronic and they have, right, more needs. And those costs are increasing the cost of the National Health Institute, which reduces the possibility of affording more patients. So you have, and if they cannot afford more patients, those patients that are under treatment, they may become worse, and then that generates a reinforcing feedback process in terms of hospital costs. So at the end, what's happened with the system, they go bankrupt because there's not enough resources to sustain. Patients that are under treatment, under medicine treatment, and patients that need to go to the hospital. So that creates a bit of an issue here. On the other hand, a reinforcing feedback process occurs when new patients, instead of being offered expensive drugs, they go into a lower or less expensive drugs, and those patients increase that market of those drugs. That's because those drugs are mainly, their main costs are based on production costs. There are a strong implication of in economies of scale. The more patients that are taking those drugs, the lower the production cost. The lower the production cost, the lower will be those prices. And that's the reinforcing feedback process 2. And as the prices decrease, as the prices decreases, other patients that were not taking those drugs, they can start taking those drugs now because they can afford. So that's the most important reinforcing feedback process. And increasing the market leads to economies of scale and leads to lower prices, and that leads to more patients being treated, which also increase the reinforcing feedback 3 increases to an increase in, it leads to an increase in the market share of the generics drugs. So as you see in this diagram, there are different colors for the different feedback processes, because what we did is that we put that diagram, we discussed this diagram with different stakeholders, and we agree on some aspects in terms of the strength of those relationships and the time delay. So we make a qualitative evaluation of the different strengths of this feedback process in order to focus on one part of the model. So we say the reinforcing feedback 1 is a medium strength, or it will not generate every one patient that they stop taking the drug will not be completely, will not necessarily go to the hospital. So there's no a strong strength, one to one. It's a medium strength. But this is a long-term process. We don't know how long will it take until the patient becomes ill, more ill, and so they need the hospital. On the other hand, the second reinforcing feedback process, the market expansion, the economies of scale, is the strongest one. So that's the one that can be realized immediately and can happen very, very fast in terms of impact in the system. So that's why we focus on that feedback process. So you say, well, at the core of this is another set of stocks and flow. But in this case, this stocks and flow, what we are representing is patients in different conditions. We have, starting from the left, we have patients that develop a cardiac affliction and then become undiagnosed. They may not know that they have the affliction, and they may die even realizing that they have that affliction. They die without knowing. If they go to the doctor, there are two options. Either the doctor prescribes an original drug or a branded drug, or the doctor prescribes a generic drug, a molecule. So here the market splits in two. They go into the generics, the low price drugs, or they go into the original, the branded drugs. In the middle, these patients, they may switch treatments if they know after, I don't know, a month of taking a certain drug, they realize that there's another one cheaper and with the same treatment attractiveness, and they start being treated with the other drug. They may die, right, because there's no certainty that they may have another complications, and they die out of that. They may abandon the treatment, so the currently treated original drugs patients, they may discontinue the treatment and they go into that box of stock of non-persistent patients. So those patients are not taking any drugs, they have an affliction, they've been diagnosed, but they are not taking anything, so their condition may get worse, and they go into the hospital, or they may even die, right, after a period of time. Or, likely, they may go back and start the treatment again. They start taking their pills again. And they may go either back to the original drugs or go into the generic drugs. So you see that this map of stocks is representing a set of behaviors. You are categorizing people in different behaviors with respect to their medicines, how they are taking their medicines, how do they feel about the disease. What we try to do with system dynamics is to look at what are the influences of those behaviors. How do you make people move from one side to the other? What can you do in order to influence the right behaviors and stop the bad behavior? Because this was a national scale model, and we didn't have all the specific data, what we try to do here is to run more sensitivity analysis of different policies. So we didn't say, follow this decision and you will have this result. We say there's a broad range of values that you can take for this decision. Let's see what is the result. So what you have in the diagram in the lower level of the diagram, that different colors shows you the range of the values for the different policies. The lines, you see that most of the lines are growing is because there's natural progression that every year you have people becoming or acquiring that cardiac diseases. So there's nothing that you can do in terms of stopping that growth. What you can do is that you can allocate those patients in different categories of treatment, and that can have certain impact in terms of how much does it cost to treat those patients. So what we did is that we treat this with these 4 potential policies. One is the percentage of reimbursement only original. The other policy was the percentage of reimbursement for original and generics. The other policy was how can you facilitate time to market, time to enter to the market, the approval of new drugs. So instead of delaying 6 months or sometimes 2 years to have a drug approved, which is similar than an existing drug, let's try to reduce that in terms of time and having it in 3 months based on there are quite a number of regulations in the European Union that you can approve drugs. For example, if you are in France, you can approve drug that has been approved in Spain. There are some regulation on that aspect. And the final one is how can you support the prescription of generic drugs, of those low price drugs, instead of supporting the branded drugs. So we run this simulation and we measure in 2 dimensions. One is the total patients currently treated. So those are the patients that are taking the pills, so you are controlling their disease. And what is the cost that this implies for the National Health Institute? So here you have, we calculated an average over all these different simulations, a maximum and a minimum. And then we look at the best policy in terms of cost per patient treated. On average, the best policy is the percentage of reimbursement of original drugs. You reimburse both drugs. So encouraging as well for people to take the original drugs, where you can have up to 200,000 patients being treated, right, with original drugs. The maximum policy, the best policy in terms of achieving the maximum access for patients is the prescription support. And in this case, when you see the maximum number of patients that will be treated is 288,700 patients. So compare 200 patients to 280,000 patients. So you have 88 potential thousand patients that under one policies are not being treated and may have complications, may die, or may generate future costs into the hospital. So see how important is this analysis in terms how can you analyze behavior over a long period of time, and in order to avoid certain costs, especially for governments, especially for healthcare systems. And in terms of the minimum policy, which you see the diverge, in the minimum policy, the lowest, if you only support reimbursement of original, only 155,000 patients will be taking the medicine. So from the maximum to the minimum, it's almost 140,000 people that may be at risk of developing worse conditions. So that's an important number that you have to consider when you are doing this type of analysis. And then there's a different, in terms of cost per patient treated. So that's one important aspect to take care of this. So what we did as well is that we transformed this model as well into an interactive learning environment where we give the model to the policy makers in order to design by themselves the policies, in order to understand what are the right combinations and what are the impacts. So how much per reimbursement they should give, how much time to enter, and what are the different results for those different decisions. So one of the important aspects as well of system dynamics is to provide the understanding and the learning from the dynamics of the system and how can you change, how can you influence the behavior of the system. So what are the conclusions from this study? We emphasize the importance of prescription support as a policy driver. So providing incentives to prescribe generic drugs, which facilitated the development of the market, improving patient access and reducing their cost, as well as increasing the percentage of reimbursement, right, to the patients, especially in order to decrease the non-compliance rate, in order to stop people abandoning the treatment. It's better to have a bit of extra cost now than to have a huge cost in the future, even though many times politicians may not be in power at that time, but okay, let's suppose that they have these process policies that agree on that. So increase the treatment reinitiating rate, generating long-term savings in the healthcare system due to decreasing future patient hospitalization rates. Any questions with this project, this work? No? So this is an important area, and nowadays there are quite a lot of funds, including in the UK, for doing simulation and supporting NHS and the government in achieving efficiencies in the system. So to summarize, what are the differences between system dynamics and discrete event simulation? We say that system dynamics, we have deterministic complexity. So we don't have randomness in our models. Most of our relationships, how many word of mouth, how many clients are generated from word of mouth, we assume that is a certain number. What you try to find out is the ways of changing that number, but you don't have a random number there. You assume that you can more or less understand what will be that number. And complexity, because multiple feedback processes makes difficult and complex to understand what's going on in the system. In the case of discrete event simulation, we call it that there is constrained randomness. So you have a system, you develop all your cues, all your resources, and the behavior of your entities, but you assume that there are certain random processes, but constrained within the system that you define, within the subsystem that you define, within the operations that you define. Most of this study has been done by two colleagues, Robinson and Moorcroft. I want to mention that. So in terms of representation, systems are represented as stocks and flow in terms of system dynamics, in terms of discrete event, cues, and activities. So this is important for the terminology. Feedback in system dynamics is explicit. We focus a lot on finding the feedback processes. In terms of discrete event, the feedback is implicit in the sense that if a client is not being treated, well, they will have to wait more time. They will have to wait until their time. So there is some implicit feedback, but there is no make it explicit in the system. Many relationships are nonlinear in system dynamics. In terms of discrete event simulations, you have the relationships as quite linear, right? Either your entity or your client is served or not. But in system dynamics, yes, your patient will be treated if all these set of constraints or aspects are being fulfilled, and many times the relationships are non-linear. Randomness is generally not modeled, it's added later. Randomness is explicitly modeled, that's why you do a lot of statistical analysis in discrete event simulation. Growth and decay is modeled as exponential or S-shape. In this case, in discrete event, growth and decay is represented as a random set of discrete steps. In system dynamics, we tend to have similar structure. If you can see the professional services firm model, the structure of the staff that I show you there can be applied to any company. So you can have in any company a set of staff with different categories. So that's a sort of fairly recurring model structure. The same with the patients. You have similar pathway for patients in many diseases. In the case of discrete event simulation, you don't have those general modeling structure. Yes, you have the queues, you have the different people moving in the queues, the resources, but there is no sort of template that say, use this template if you want to represent a fast food company, a fast food restaurant. You have to adapt to the different situations. In system dynamics, the diagram format is a standard. All the models will have this: stocks, boxes, flows, right, and connectors. In discrete event, it's not quite clear. If you have been learning simulate, if you go and try to learn the other license, you will see that you have a step learning curve to do that. In terms of interpretation, what you learn out of the simulation, in discrete event simulation, feedback delays and nonlinearities are not emphasized. You don't emphasize the feedback. You don't assume that being a client in a queue will imply that he will not come to the business. That's a feedback process that you don't think about that. What you try to emphasize here is really how the system behaves in terms of the randomness that is embedded in the system, right? And what do you need to address those randomness in the system? How do you need to address the main objectives of the system depending on the views of the owner of the system? In system dynamics, the important thing is to understand what are the key stocks, what are the feedback, what are the delays that make the system behave in a certain way. And that's why it's very important, the representation, and we put a lot of emphasis on developing the conceptual model in system dynamics, which is essentially a set of causal loop diagrams, because the structure, and because it's deterministic, this structure will lead you to a certain behavior over time. A structure leads to behavior. In discrete event simulation, you have the structure, but they are randomness, so you don't know exactly what will be the behavior over time until you simulate. So that's one of the important interpretations. So there are two key philosophical differences between system dynamics and discrete event simulation that you need to consider, and if in the future you are going to focus on simulation as part of your professional career, is that in system dynamics we are always focusing in deterministic and dynamic complexity. The dynamic complexity coming from the feedback process. And because this structure determines behavior, the future can be partially and significantly predetermined. You can infer approximately what will be the future. In discrete event simulation, the future depends on chance, depends on the randomness of the arrivals of clients, and the characteristics of those clients. What sort of product are they requiring? How often? When they are arriving? At what time are they arriving? So you don't know the future until the things happens. So feedback structure creates, in system dynamics, create puzzling dynamic behavior, different shapes. In discrete event simulation, what is difficult to understand is determined by the randomness that you have